want to do a quick patron update. I don't normally do patron updates, but figured I'll do one while people are still arriving. There are at least 2 patrons in my chat. Welcome. Well, actually, hell, there's 3. 3? Yeah, I see 3. Welcome. It's good to see you all. So, patrons, don't ask much from this plebe. I appreciate that, because if they did, I'd delete them. I like when people like want to support me. I don't like when they start making big asks on me, because I'm mostly right now, I'm already making pretty big asks on myself, but I also feel very self-conscious about the fact that I have patrons supporting me, and I'm not putting out a lot of content constantly. And the way that the algorithm gods work in the attention economy, if you aren't putting stuff out there, you're like fading away. You know, some content creators like ContraPoints, they're able to do a video once a month. That's pretty neat. I don't know if I'd be able to build up enough hype. My last video essay, Kelly Zahos recently said that on Twitter when she was tweeting it out, she said that this video, my most recent video essay, the one on neoliberal hegemony and ideology and problems with the current configuration of the left, she said it's criminally underviewed. And obviously, I think that's always true with everything that I do. Everything could always be a little bit better, because when you're a perfectionist, you just like, you know, you want eyeballs to see it. But when you do like an hour-long treatise on a topic, and you try to make it as accessible as possible, but it's also like articulating like your last year of dilemma concerning specific issues, and then it doesn't really get much traction. It's like, wait, what am I doing on YouTube anyway? Right? Like that's the instant thought. It's like, what am I doing on YouTube? Why am I even doing these essays? And you know, this is mostly the fault of my YouTube termination, right? My YouTube channel has never bounced back since the termination. I was growing fast as a channel, and after the termination, there's been no growth. But as I've said to people, I don't really need growth. What I need is like, I don't know, a steady viewership. I'd be much happier with a steady viewership than with a large channel. My problem is that steady viewership, because people fade away, requires new people coming. And so, this has me like thinking, well, what are the strategies? You know, how often should I be putting out content? You know, what do my patrons want from me? You know, I say on the one hand, kind of like half sarcastically that like, you know, I don't want huge asks, you know, like I'm already, you know, trying to do stuff. But at the same time, like, I guess I need to write a thing so that like before people patronize me, that's not really what it's called, but you know, lend me patronage. I know to, you know, they know what they're signing up for, which is, hey, don't have high expectations. It's really just like, if you like what I'm doing, whatever the fuck I'm doing, then this is just a way of supporting it. But ultimately I'm doing this for freedom. And so what am I doing right now? Well, if you actually look at my Patreon, I'm not going to bring it up here on screen. It's not important. It just says that I'm writing a book. It says that I'm also making video essays. It also says I'm doing roadside rants. It also says that I'm doing remixes occasionally. It says that I'm leading discussion groups sometimes, rarely, barely often. It says I'm doing lectures. That's a lot of different things. Turns out, like, you can't do them all at the same time. And we're about to get into a whole conversation about productivity and the fetishization of being a productive, you know, neoliberal subject and blah, blah, blah. But before I get into that, I do want to say, I've been doing a lot of soul searching recently, and like, am I trying to build a YouTube right now? Am I trying to build a Twitch stream right now? Am I trying to build a website right now? Am I trying to develop Skillshare courses right now? Like, what am I doing? And the long and short of it is this: I'm writing a book. And it's not like the whole Lease the Plebe campaign and trying to get me a place in the world to be like relatively stable so that I could focus on this work was merely due to the fact that, you know, I'm so underprivileged that I'm not able to like fend for myself, right? Like I know how to play the game. I've worked many jobs. I've paid rent most of my life, and you know, I've worked since the age of 14. and I am 32 now. And I have lived in probably over 20 locations, and a lot of those places I was on a lease. And for me, the journey and the hardship, one of the big hardships for the last, I don't know, 10, why am I saying 10? Probably 5. So yeah, so literally over exaggerating by half. Okay, but yeah, probably the last 5 to 7 years, kind of in there, has been to find a living situation where there is some sort of reciprocity, where I am appreciated, or I'm appreciated for something that I'm able to offer, or the person is just supporting the work that I am doing. Because my experience in the work world and renting life has been that you have to work full time just to pay rent, right? You can't work part time and pay rent. It's not possible. But I need to have a living situation that frees up the time and energy necessary to be able to do this project that I feel called to do, right? Because it is a sort of calling. And what is this project? And so if you're new to me, if you're new to this content, if you're a new patron, especially, I do kind of want to keep directing this at patrons, because I've had a couple of new patrons. I think I lose more than I get during COVID, which is totally obviously fine. But I do get some new ones every once in a while, and it's just like, I just want to be very clear, like, well, what is it that I'm doing? Is it just teaching philosophy? Well, I'm teaching philosophy and critical theory and trying to develop and articulate what I call critical media theory, which is a sort of conjunction of philosophy of technology, media studies, and critique of political economy. Draws a lot off of post-structuralism, existentialism, phenomenology. These are all like loaded terms, academic jargon. If it doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. But let me give it in plebe speak. Plebe speak wise, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take what I consider to be a very important, very time-sensitive information and conceptual systems, frameworks that have been developed through the mode of that we call critique and critical theory in the last couple of 100 years, and translate that stuff out of its jargon, put it into plain speak, plebe speak, right? We are plebeians. People, even if you are a relatively privileged person who went to a private school and had an education in this stuff, the chances are you didn't read Das Kapital, the 3 volumes that were that Marx was able to. Well, I guess he published 1 in his lifetime. 2 were put together posthumously. Kind of a 4th was put up later. Oh wow! Thank you, Tillensman, for the tier 1 subscription on the website. I'll check it on chat here in a second, by the way, folks. But what I'm saying is that I don't want to destroy capitalism or overthrow capitalism or decolonize or fight fascism or do any of these quote unquote lefty things for their own sake. I don't want to do these things out of resistance. I don't want to do these things out of rebellion. I don't want to do these things. I did most of my life, but that is not where I currently stand. For me, I think mere resistance or mere rebellion has just as much a chance at backfiring. And so for me, it's like, what are we trying to, the imperatives put forward by normies and theorists alike, what comes after the revolution and what will that look like? Not just like, oh, we have to, get into the cook shops of the future, as Marx kind of scorned the idea of like, utopian, like, oh, we can just like imagine the future and then we, move into the, what we want by projecting what we currently want into some future. It's like, no. It's a bigger project than that. It says, what are the conditions necessary for producing a good life, and why are those currently obstructed? And what are the main obstructions that can be dismantled strategically in our lifetimes? In a way that would allow for an unfolding of a new symbolization of society, of culture, and of civilization, and of human relationships between one another and the world. And with that new symbolization, produce through material reconfigurations of society, new subjectivities that are not neoliberal subjectivities, that are not capitalist subjectivities. I'm not saying that that things like greed or selfishness could ever be abolished, and that I think that would actually be a stupid idea to try to abolish such a thing. There is a reason that the project of scientific socialism and critique of political economy and critical theory, all three of those projects, which overlap so much, try to not bring your own little in-group personal preferences. Oh, I'm a liberal. Oh, I'm a conservative, and oh, I'm a Christian. Oh, I'm an atheist. Those little value-based prejudices into the analysis and into the critique, because what we're trying to get to is something beyond mere cringe, beyond mere disagreement, beyond mere, oh, it's bad because I don't like it, or oh, it's bad because it's obviously not fair. Yeah, fairness is obviously a good thing. And a society that prioritizes empathy is a good thing. But at the same time, those are moral values. Those are a part of hegemonic liberalism. They have been sufficiently co-opted by every structure that we currently live under. And they uphold the worst of the worst, being their opposites in the form of Trumpism and these douchebags, these back to work protester people. I see it all as a part of a deadlock, a culture war moment that has to be superseded, that we need to get out of, that we're currently trapped in, and I don't see a way out immediately, especially not in our current configuration. And so that is what my most recent video essay is kind of getting at, is my frustrations, my disillusionment. And these are not mine. These are also shared by everybody who was a part of the 1968 revolutions, who kind of remained in fidelity to the notions of justice and truth, but who understood after organizing workers and students, after shutting Paris down, realized, oh my God, we won, and yet we still lost. What are we to make of a series of wins that are short-lived, and after they are over, result in so much backlash that it actually sets us back even further than when we started? Now, there are obviously Zapatistas, and there are all kinds of like small localist resistances everywhere. Everywhere that there is oppression, there is resistance. The question, though, of coordinating, coalition building, and of systematically dismantling certain institutions while establishing other ones in ways that will not create the backlash and multi-generational disillusionment that followed the 60s and led to neoliberalism. The question is how do we do that? And how do we learn from history? And learning from history doesn't just mean becoming a historian and either buying into people who have a one-dimensional oppressor narrative or a one-dimensional victim narrative. No, it means understanding the complexities and the pitfalls. It means reading Frantz Fanon's A Wretched of the Earth and understanding the real issues of expanding a universal project across national boundaries. And understanding the complexities of colonization or colonialism, and then at the same time realizing that Fanon is not the end of the story, right? And it means moving through these things dialectically, as we say. Not just, dialectics is not just a big process of competing narratives, finding synthesis in culture. It's also us sorting ourselves out in culture as we move forward, and it's us sorting ourselves out with one another, vis-a-vis past, present, and future. All of those things always intermixed. And so, in short, my project is a pretty hefty one, right? I don't want to sound lofty. Don't want to sound, it's kind of the intellectual dilemma. It's like, look, for me, it's not for anybody who I've ever had a really good conversation about philosophy with. It's like, this isn't about it's a lot less about what it makes us look like that we're doing it. It's a lot more about like, no, we just literally are committed to like ideas of truth or justice because we've experienced a lot of untruth and we've experienced a lot of injustice. And so we also understand that these things are more and more complicated, and we've been through enough like experiences seeing people use these words, right? Without really seeming to care about like what they really mean beyond their own personal inclinations and preferences. And so I want to take that critical project, largely developed from Marx, but bring it into dialogue with the 21st century, bring it into dialogue with lessons learned from history, bring it into dialogue with existentialists and phenomenologists who have equally important, like world-shattering discoveries in the last 100 years that changed the course of civilization, that haven't been digested by culture, because we live in a culture industry that awards distraction, that awards superficiality, that awards basically making art and education into a matter of career enhancement or pursuit, and into ladder climbing instead of into a matter of doing these things as goods in themselves, right? And for me, someone who had no formal education until the age of 23, it's very important. I take it very seriously. And so when people act like, oh, this is just like, I always had like this attitude of like, oh, people coming along and they talking with all these big words and, they think that they're so self-important. And, there is some of that. Sometimes that's actually a lot of academia is that. And it's ultimately just like a way so that people can feel justified in becoming the exploiter class, right? Oh, well, I'm in debt to this institution, or, oh, this, institution taught me so much. And, oh, I'm going to continue on with society as it's currently configured, relatively speaking. Maybe I'll say that I'm for protest and radical things, but ultimately I'm a secret believer in just, we just push for extremes because we know that that's a negotiating tactic, and then we'll get our incremental changes, as though that's been like the solution. Well, it has been the solution now for 70 years. And that's a theory of social change that, I've lost faith with. I've been very disillusioned with intellectualism for most of my life. But what I'm saying is that once I started studying philosophy and theory, I realized, shit, okay, this is the most anti-intellectual world that we could possibly live in. What I was actually railing against was the kind of intellectualism of these people at the New York Times, these people at the Washington Post, these people who are blue check marks on Twitter, these people who are in a career pursuing game of sophistry without any serious like fidelity to these real questions that are so much more important now in a time of climate change, mass migrations, impending famines, droughts, and just in general accelerating global destabilization. And so for me, like, this book is like, I feel like, every one of us has something to say at some point. And, I'm calling this my first shitty book because that will help me get it off my chest and just get it out there. And it'll help me just fucking write it, because I feel like I don't have time to write like an excellent treatise on something. But I want to save people 8 years of hardship that I've been through by offering up stuff that you're not going to get in a 101 course that should be in a 101 course, right? While at the same time bringing it into dialogue with the contemporary situation that we find ourselves in, where a normie socialist like Bernie, who basically did everything that you could have possibly done right, except for potentially being a little bit meaner and not calling Biden his friend, where he loses, right? Like, in that situation, it's like bloody revolution seems like the only alternative, but you can yell all you want. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to get people who aren't feeling it as well on board. So it's like, for me, my job is not to persuade people to become revolutionaries. My job is to understand the deadlocks that we are in, because I believe that understanding things through theory is the only way to change the real. There is no praxis without it. And so that, those are extreme statements. They are grounded in theory, and in the works, the thought of these people who, I'm going back to this idea, were disillusioned with 1968. Specifically the French school, specifically people like Foucault and Derrida and Lacan and Badiou and Bourdieu, all of these names. The question of Deleuze and Guattari, like or do we need hierarchically organized organizations that are going to actually make us a contender on the global stage, or are we to go for tactics of pure diversion and sabotage and resistance, like D&G. These are important questions, and there are more important questions still. And ultimately, I'm just saying, dear patrons, that's where my head is at. That's ultimately what I'm working on. That's going on behind the scenes. Behind me right now, I have a table with pieces of paper like these ones, and the whole thing is covered with them, and I'm writing multiple chapters of potentially multiple books. It's really hard at this stage in the development because I'm only 4 months in on writing this thing. I wrote a first draft. I'm now writing all these other chapters, and it's like I have to get it down to something that's manageable, something that would be like, you can hold it in your hand and it's not going to be overwhelming. Something that's not going to be 400 fucking pages, because we don't need that. But at the same time, something that's not just, speaking in terms readily assimilated into like everything you already know, because if it is, it's not worth learning. But at the same time, it needs to be able to connect and be intuitive enough and accessible enough for enough people, right? And typically theorists don't bother. But I feel like on the one hand, I benefit from trying to do this, and some people apparently think it's worthwhile as well. But and that's the people who subscribe on my website. That's the people who are supporting me on Patreon. That's the people who have supported me with this virtual classroom fundraiser that you see above me, which actually we're there. We've raised $222, and actually I haven't asked for any more money via that donation method since we got to 222, because I've been kind of on a fence and I've done a little technology research. And so this is my exciting update before we bring Damon on stream. Sorry it's taken so long, Damon, but the virtual classroom, yeah, I'm officially like deleting it off of there. The stuff is in the mail. I'm going to have things where they are. I'm actually using the camera that I'll be using. I just have to order an additional couple of pieces of hardware before I'm able to rely on it. It requires like an AC adapter. It requires a dedicated video capture card, because this video capture card is actually for the whiteboard, etc., 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 etc. So anyway, here we go.